December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, 7:55 a.m. The air trembles before the first bomb hits. A shriek of engines cuts through the tropical morning, and within seconds, the Pacific's calm is shattered. Flames rip through the decks of the USS Arizona. The explosion lifts a column of fire hundreds of feet into the sky. Oil boils on the water, black and burning, turning the harbor into a floating inferno. Japanese pilots trained to precision, relentless weave between rising pillars of smoke. In their cockpits, stopwatch timers tick. Below, sailors stumble from their bunks, their faces pale and glistening with sweat and fear. The Oklahoma capsizes, rolling like a dying whale. The West Virginia groans as torpedoes tear open her side, metal shrieking like something alive. By the time the second wave ends, 7 of 8 battleships are sunk or crippled, the pride of the U.S. and the seaman's Pacific Fleet lies silent beneath the oily tide. Tokyo celebrates, Tokyo believes. The message rings across Japan. The American Pacific Fleet has ceased to exist. But beneath that smoke, in the shattered hulls and twisted steel, something else is stirring, something no one in Tokyo could have imagined. December 8th, 1941. The smoke still hangs over Pearl Harbor like a funeral shroud. Divers descend into a world of black water, diesel fumes and silence. The Pacific Fleet lies broken. West Virginia, California, Nevada, Oklahoma, Arizona, names now whispered like tombstones. The smell of fuel oil and burnt paint clings to everything. The surface men cough through rags. The divers below can barely see their hands in front of their faces. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz arrives weeks later to take command. The harbor is a cemetery, but his eyes don't see graves. They see unfinished battleships. Gentlemen, he says, staring out at the oil-slicked bay, these ships are not dead. What follows is not a battle of bombs, but of bolts, pumps, and courage. A race against decay itself. The U.S. Navy's Bureau of Ships calls it salvage operations. The men who do it call it hell. Underwater welders and divers from the Pacific Fleet's repair unit, led by Rear Admiral Homer N. Wallin, begin the impossible. Their mission: raise an armada from the mud. Every vessel tells a different story. The USS West Virginia rests upright, but gutted, with 7 massive torpedo holes along her port side. Inside, the air smells of death. Divers find men still at their stations, clutching wrenches, gauges, and prayer books. Some compartments are sealed by warping metal. Cutting them open risks explosions from trapped fuel vapors. The USS California lies half submerged in the oily shallows. She sank slowly that morning as her crew fought to stay aboard. Now she must be raised one sealed compartment at a time. Divers close watertight doors, patch gashes with steel plates and concrete, and pump out seawater with portable air compressors that scream day and night. In the shallows, the Nevada, the only battleship to get underway during the attack, is grounded near Hospital Point, her bow burned and hull riddled with shrapnel. She's battered but proud. She'll fight again, one officer mutters, brushing rust from her side. The process is brutal. Divers work by touch. They grope through jagged metal blind in the murk, scraping against barnacles and wiring. Their air hoses tangle. Any spark could ignite the oil-saturated harbor. Above them, cranes groan, hauling out debris guns, twisted bulkheads, fragments of uniforms. The work never stops. Within weeks, pumps roar to life. As the seawater drains, the ships rise inch by inch, revealing wounds that once seemed mortal. Rust-colored streaks weep down their sides like blood. The smell of rot mixes with oil, but the sound of hammering steady, determined, drowns out despair. Then an extraordinary sight. By February 1942, the California breaks the surface. Cheers echo across the harbor. Men stop to watch, some with tears in their eyes. A ship once written off as dead now floats again, her flag rising defiantly in the morning wind. In workshops along Ford Island, engineers rebuild engines, rewire circuits, refit turrets. Every bolt tightened is an act of defiance. They call the effort the Ghost Fleet ships resurrected from the bottom, haunting Japan's overconfidence. The Navy's salvage crews log thousands of dives, more than 4,000 man-hours underwater in some cases. Divers like Chief Petty Officer William A. Moffett risk their lives daily. One spark, one mistake, and the whole operation could vanish in flames. By summer, the West Virginia II is upright and refloated. Her decks are gutted, her bulk scarred, yet she's alive. Her captain, Mervyn S. Bennion, who died commanding her during the attack, is posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. His ship will fight again. Newspapers barely mention the effort. The American public hears of Guadalcanal and the Coral Sea, not the men in dark waters lifting wrecks piece by piece. But in Pearl Harbor, word spreads quietly they're coming back. For Japan, the Pacific seemed secure. But under the surface, America was performing a miracle of steel and sweat. And the first signs of that miracle would soon appear on the horizon, painted gray, silent, and very much alive. Spring 1942. Pearl Harbor hums with the rhythm of rebirth. What once smelled of burning oil now carries the metallic tang of welding sparks and paint. Cranes swing over the bay, hoisting new gun mounts. Sparks shower across the decks of ships thought lost forever. The USS West Virginia rises first, battered but unbroken. Divers had sealed her torpedo holes with thick steel patches, pumped her dry, and now the mighty WWII stands tall again. When the crew's survivors step back aboard, they pause. The silence of that December morning returns in memory, the flames, the screams, the water rushing in, but this time the ship breathes again. Inside reconstruction begins. Electricians crawl through gutted compartments to replace wiring melted by heat. Welders seal bulkheads so tight you can feel the vibration echo through the hull. Engineers overhaul her turbines and boilers, bringing the heart of the ship back to life. From every corner of the Pacific, spare parts arrive from San Diego, Mare Island, Bremerton. What Japan thought destroyed becomes a jigsaw puzzle of reborn steel. Across the harbor, the USS California is a mirror of the same miracle. The old prune barge, as sailors jokingly call her, was submerged for months, her decks blackened and crusted with silt. Yet within a year she too is stripped down and reborn. The saltwater damage to her engines is severe, her electrical systems almost fossilized, but every challenge becomes a triumph of patience. By early 1943, her decks shine again under the Hawaiian sun. Her guns reinstalled, polished and tested thunder in a practice salvo that echoes across the bay. Civilians stop on nearby roads to watch. It feels like witnessing a ghost come alive. The Japanese never expected this. Their pilots had flown back from Pearl Harbor, convinced they had annihilated the Pacific Fleet. To them, the sight of the West Virginia's smoke was proof that America's backbone had been broken. But by 1944, when their reconnaissance planes spotted the same ships cutting through the Pacific, the reports were dismissed as errors impossible, some officers said. And yet it was true. The West Virginia was rearmed with the latest radar-guided fire control systems, her once obsolete design now upgraded for modern naval warfare. The California II was refitted with advanced anti-aircraft batteries radar and improved armor plating. Both ships rejoined the Pacific Fleet stronger than before. On the day the West Virginia left Pearl Harbor for the first time since the attack, a crowd gathered along the docks. Sailors, mechanics and welders, men who had lived months breathing fumes and working sleepless nights, stood in silence as the ship's engines rumbled to life. Slowly, the WWII began to move. Her hull, once covered in mud and scars, glided over the same waters where she had once burned. The flag rose again. Commander Harold Larson, one of the senior engineers overseeing the refit, would later write, "We didn't just rebuild a ship, we rebuilt the spirit of the fleet." The Ghost Fleet now numbered more than just West Virginia and California. The Nevada, Tennessee, Maryland, and Pennsylvania had also been restored. One by one, these giants returned to service, each carrying the invisible weight of the men lost beneath them. The symbolism was impossible to miss. The same battleships that had sunk in humiliation now steamed westward, their guns aimed toward the very empire that had written them off. Every turn of the propeller, every echo of their engines was a message to Tokyo. You didn't destroy us. You made us stronger. When Japan's radio operators later intercepted fleet transmissions from ships bearing those names, the disbelief was instant. One officer at the Yokosuka Naval District reportedly asked, "Is this a deception signal?" Another, upon hearing confirmation, whispered, "Then we are already losing." The dead fleet had returned. The ghosts were real, and their vengeance would be written not in words, but in fire across the Pacific. October 24th, 1944. The waters of the Philippines boil with thunder. It is the eve of the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval engagement in human history. And among the grey silhouettes forming up in the dawn mist are names long thought erased: West Virginia, California, Tennessee, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. The Ghost Fleet has returned, steel reborn from the mud of Pearl Harbor. For 3 years they've been refitted, retrained, and rearmed. Their hulls gleam under the tropical sun. The once silent guns are alive again. Radar antennas spin atop their superstructures, a symbol of America's technological leap forward. On their decks, sailors who were children when the war began now prepare to face the Japanese Navy head-on. Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf, commands the battle line guarding Surigao Strait. His formation is a perfect trap. To the south, Admiral Nishimura's Japanese fleet, the remnants of the once mighty Imperial Navy, steams forward under cover of darkness. Their orders break through to Leyte Gulf and crush the US invasion force. They have no idea what awaits them. At 02:00 a.m., the American radar operators aboard West Virginia pick up distant echoes. The radar system, one of the most advanced in the world, marks the incoming enemy long before the Japanese spot them. Contact bearing 045 degrees, range 22,000 yards. The Ghost speaks first. Oldendorf's voice comes over the fleet radio: "Open fire when ready." What follows is a symphony of vengeance. At 03:51 a.m., the West Virginia unleashes her first broadside, 8 16-inch guns roaring in unison. The night sky erupts with orange light. The concussion ripples across the water, echoing through the Philippine mountains. Seconds later, California and Tennessee join in their salvos, overlapping in perfect rhythm. The sea glows with the arcs of tracer fire and the blossoms of exploding shells. Within minutes, the Japanese formation disintegrates. The battleship Yamashiro takes multiple direct hits, her deck aflame. The cruiser Megami staggers under the weight of incoming shells. Torpedoes from US destroyers slice through the black water, finishing what the Ghost Fleet began. By dawn, the strait is silent again, filled with burning wrecks and drifting oil. The Japanese Southern Force ceases to exist. As the smoke clears, the veterans aboard West Virginia stand at their stations, staring into the sunrise. Some whisper names shipmates lost 3 years ago at Pearl Harbor. For them, this battle is not just victory, it is resurrection made real. Oldendorf's line of battleships has achieved something unseen since the days of Trafalgar, a classic crossing of the T. Every ship that fired that night had once been struck down at Pearl Harbor. Every salvo fired was redemption. A war correspondent later wrote, "The ghosts of Pearl Harbor fought tonight and they won." The Japanese Navy never fully recovered from Leyte Gulf. It marked the end of its capacity to project power across the Pacific. Yet for America, it symbolized something even greater: industrial resurrection. Behind every shell fired that night stood the men who had raised the ships, from the mud divers, welders, mechanics, and engineers who never saw battle but made victory possible. Their unseen hands had turned wrecks into weapons, despair into defiance. When Admiral Nimitz received word of the victory, he simply nodded and said, "They've earned their peace." The Ghost Fleet continued to serve through the final months of the war, bombarding island fortresses and escorting carriers toward Japan. But their true victory was already sealed in that narrow Philippine Strait, the night they proved that even in destruction, America could not be broken. In Tokyo, reports of the battle filtered through in disbelief. "These ships were sunk at Pearl Harbor," one naval officer protested. The reply came coldly, "They were once." And in that single word, once, Japan's illusion of invincibility finally cracked. Long before the West Virginia fired her first shell in the Philippines, her true battle had been fought in silence, not on the high seas but beneath the black water of Pearl Harbor. To the public, the ship seemed to rise by miracle. To the men who worked day and night in the filth and darkness, it was a nightmare of endurance. Divers, machinists, welders, and shipwrights, most of them ordinary men, faced a task unlike anything attempted before. They called themselves the Mudmen. The Navy called them heroes. Chief Warrant Officer Homer Wallin, the engineer who directed much of the operation, became a legend. His teams crawled through mangled hulls and toxic sludge-breathing air through hoses that reeked of oil and decay. Visibility underwater was often no more than 6 inches. You worked by touch, one diver recalled. Every step you found, bodies, loose wires, broken steel. It was like walking through death itself. The psychological toll was immense. Many divers surfaced trembling, haunted by the lifeless faces they brushed against in the dark. But there was no time for mourning. Pumps had to run, patch plates had to seal, and deadlines loomed. Every minute saved meant one step closer to the impossible, bringing the fleet back to life. The work consumed years. Engineers built special caissons to cover shattered hulls, forcing compressed air inside to expel the seawater. Each patch had to withstand enormous pressure. A single mistake could flood an entire compartment or explode from trapped gases. Fires broke out regularly from welding sparks meeting oil vapors. The men worked anyway. They slept in tents beside the docks, their uniforms soaked in fuel, their skin permanently stained black from oil. "We reeked like the harbor," one wrote in his diary. But we didn't care. We were raising ghosts. Behind them, thousands of civilians and naval yard workers contributed unseen. Women in coveralls welded seams. Machinists reshaped damaged propeller shafts. Electricians rewired entire battleships from scratch. No one thought about glory. Their motivation was simpler vengeance and restoration. Even the local Hawaiian community joined the effort. Cafes stayed open through the night, feeding the repair crews. Children collected scrap metal for the naval yard. Across the islands, an unspoken pact bound everyone together. Pearl Harbor would not remain a grave. By mid-1943, 18 major vessels had been refloated, repaired, or returned to service, an engineering miracle that defied every prediction. Admiral Nimitz later said, "It wasn't strategy that turned the tide at sea. It was the mechanics in the mud, but the cost was real. At least 50 salvage workers and divers lost their lives in accidents, explosions, or decompression sickness. Their names rarely appeared in newspapers. Yet without them, California would have remained a sunken monument and West Virginia a rusted coffin." Years later, many survivors described the sound that haunted them most, not the explosions or the machinery, but the eerie groaning of metal as each ship began to lift from the bottom. It sounded, one man said, like something trying to breathe again. When the Nevada steamed out of Pearl Harbor for the first time since 1941, the dock workers lined the shore. Some waved, others saluted. None spoke. They didn't need to. The moment said everything. This was what victory looked like before a single shot was fired. The men who built that victory never wore medals or marched in parades. Their war was measured in inches of rising steel and gallons of pumped-out water. But when the guns of Surigao Strait thundered years later, their invisible fingerprints were on every shell fired. In the end, the Ghost Fleet's resurrection was more than a feat of engineering. It was a national act of faith, the belief that even after devastation, something stronger can rise. And, for the men beneath the waves, that belief was forged not in speeches but in darkness, fear, and the slow heartbeat of a ship returning from the dead. August 15th, 1945. Tokyo. Emperor Hirohito's voice trembles over the radio as he announces Japan's surrender. Half a world away, the stars over Pearl Harbor shimmer above calm waters that once burned with fire. The harbor is silent now except for the hum of night insects and the slow churn of patrol boats returning to berth. On Ford Island, a sailor leans over the rail of the USS West Virginia, looking down into the same water that swallowed his ship 4 years earlier. "We came full circle," he murmurs. Around him, the deck glows faintly under the moon, smooth, restored, immaculate. The ghosts have finally come home. For the men who fought at Surigao Strait, the end of the war carries a strange stillness. Victory, yes, but also the weight of memory. Each ship bears scars that no refit could erase. The West Virginia's hull still carries faint outlines where torpedoes once struck. The California's decks still smell faintly of oil and char. These reminders remain deliberate, silent memorials of how close America came to losing the Pacific. When Admiral Nimitz toured the harbor after the surrender, he paused before the raised wreck of the USS Arizona, still lying beneath shallow water entombing more than 1,000 men. He removed his cap and said quietly, "Let her rest. She is the foundation of all we've built since." The resurrection of the fleet was never about revenge alone. It was about defiance, the refusal to accept death as final. In a single year, America had turned from mourning to mobilization, from ashes to industry. Factories from San Francisco to Pittsburgh worked around the clock to forge replacement armor engines and guns. The power of the American shipyard, the invisible arsenal behind every deckhand and diver, became the real weapon that won the Pacific. The Japanese military had underestimated one thing above all, not the number of ships, but the spirit of the men who built them. Their pilots had seen explosions, they had not seen the resolve. They couldn't comprehend that what sank in one dawn could sail again by another. After the war, the Ghost Fleet ships served in peacetime roles, training new sailors, supporting occupation forces, and later being decommissioned. The West Virginia was finally scrapped in 1959, her steel recycled, her spirit enduring. The California followed her bell preserved in a museum. The names live on in new vessels bearing their legacy. Yet perhaps the truest legacy lies not in the ships themselves, but in the people who refused to give up on them, the welders who patched holes 1 inch at a time, the divers who descended into oil-choked coffins, the women who riveted new decks, and the engineers who redrew entire blueprints from memory. They all became part of something larger than war, the rebirth of hope. Historians later called it the miracle of Pearl Harbor. But for those who were there, it wasn't a miracle at all. It was human will, steady, disciplined, relentless. Today, visitors to Pearl Harbor still gaze upon the gleaming white memorial over the Arizona, unaware that beneath them once lay the cradle of a resurrection that stunned the world. If they listen closely, they can almost hear it, the distant thrum of engines, long silent, the echo of hammer blows, the voices of men who refused to let history end in defeat. The Japanese commanders who once toasted victory in 1941 could never have imagined that the very fleet they believed destroyed would return to break their empire. Their mistake was thinking that destruction could conquer determination. Pearl Harbor began as tragedy but ended as testament. The Ghost Fleet did not just rise from the sea, it rose from the human spirit itself, proving once and for all that even in war's darkest depths hope floats.